Of course, of course. Let's start it in Carolina. They hired former Colts head coach Frank Reich. It was the first hire of the cycle. It kind of, I don't want to say came out of nowhere, but I don't know if Frank Reich was necessarily expected to get a job in this hiring cycle. I think a lot of people thought he was going to, do what a lot of people have done. Mike McCarthy did it, just taking that year off. It seems like Cliff Kingsbury is going to be doing that. I think that's where everyone kind of thought it was leaning, but then the Panthers kind of come out of nowhere and hire Frank Reich. What do you think of the hire?
I like it. A lot of people, I think, were kind of flaming Carolina, and they said that Steve Wilks deserved a chance, and he most definitely did. But the thing is, Steve Wilks is a defensive-minded coach, and nothing against defensive-minded coaches. But when was the last time a defensive-minded coach led his team to a Super Bowl?
Yeah,
I think Pete Carroll. Honestly, I
probably.
mean, here in Seattle, right? And so I'm not saying you can't win with the defensive-minded head coach, but I think with Carolina and how they've kind of mapped out their blueprint to hopefully gaining more success, they probably figured out, offense is the way to go. An offensive-minded guy is the way to go. Quarterback guru type of guy is the way to go. And like you said, Frank Reich, you weren't so sure about his cachet and whatnot, but before that whole disaster in Indianapolis with the plethora of quarterbacks, that carousel of quarterbacks that they were kind of going into all these seasons with, Frank Reich was known as that quarterback whisperer. He was known as that offensive mastermind. He was known as that guy that could work with quarterbacks. The problem was Indianapolis never had any stability at the game's most important position, and so I think a lot of things that he kind of did over there were kind of overlooked. I understand they got out to a very rocky start because he got fired. What was in the middle of this season, correct? Right. And so, I can't put the blame entirely on him. I mean, obviously, yeah, some of it has to fall on him, because he is the head coach. But overall, I think Carolina made I think a great move, and I think that kind of signals to me that they're looking to take, a young quarterback. If they need to trade up into the top five to get their guy, then so be it. But I think Frank Reich, like I said, he's known as an offensive guru. He's known as an offensive mastermind. He's known for working alongside quarterbacks, and Carolina wants to build a competent roster around a quarterback that they can hopefully grab in the top 10 in this year's draft. So overall, I like the move. If I had to give it a grade, I'd say right now I'd give it a B.
Yeah, I think if you go back to around, in about 2010, the only coaches to win Super Bowls as defensive-minded head coaches is Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, and then I believe John Fox in there as well.
Right. There you go.
But I mean, and Tom Coughlin in there in 2011, but for the most part, it doesn't happen. You're either talking about Pete Carroll, who's probably a borderline Hall of Fame head coach. Tom Coughlin was in that discussion as well. And then the best coach of all time in Bill Belichick. It's just not something that happens, right? You take a look, and even like some of the better defensive head, like we looked at Dan Quinn. They obviously blew that lead to Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. But a lot of these games come down to offense. So I understand with them wanting to go with an offensive head coach. It's one of my favorite hires in this cycle, I think, because he immediately comes in and he's the best head coach in the division, like easily.
Yeah.
Right. Todd Bowles is not, I think he proved himself not to be incompetent last year, but he had a lot of mistakes. He was bailed out a lot. There was a couple games down the stretch last year. It happened in the Rams game. It happened in the Saints game. And it worked out for them both times, but it's like where they're punting in these positions where it's like, you should not be punting here. Like, it's one of those, it's like, it's a obvious go for it situation. They punt and it winds up working out, but just because it works out doesn't mean it was the right decision. Then obviously you go, and Dennis Allen has been kind of a dumpster fire wherever he's been a head coach at. And then obviously I think the jury's still out on Smith for the Falcons. So, I really like the Frank Reich hire, and I think that a lot of the stuff that the Panthers are going to do, we'll talk about Derek Carr in a little bit. I think they need to go, if you're going to have Frank Reich, I think you need to go fresh at quarterback. Start off fresh with a young guy. I think he's tried out the veteran. He's tried out the Carson Wentz. He's tried out the Phillip Rivers. I think what's best for him is probably let's just go young, whether that's C.J. Stroud or probably aren't going to trade up to get Bryce Young at one, but I think they have to go young in order for this hire to make true sense, because otherwise it kind of feels like he'd be doing the same thing that he was doing in Indy. And of course, I'm sure that's something that was discussed in the interview process. So I think they probably know where they're going to go at quarterback already.